In 1971, the U.S. Department of Labor started the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, better known as OSHA. The objective of OSHA is to ensure worker safety and health by working closely with your organization and you, the employee, to create a safer working environment. Now, throughout this training session, you'll be introduced to some of the OSHA standards relating to a few of the hazards that may be associated with your job. OSHA and your employer want you to be familiar with these standards and to follow proper policy and procedure when working around these potentially hazardous materials. Hard hats, gloves, steel-toe shoes, face shields, earplugs, and respirators. These are just a few of the many different types of personal protective equipment, or PPE, designed to safeguard areas of the body that may become exposed to a potential hazard. Over the years, OSHA has tested this safety equipment and verified its ability to aid in the safety and protection within certain hazardous environments. Now, because all jobs are not created equal, higher levels of protection are required when a greater risk of injury may be present. For example, earplugs would be inadequate protection for someone who might work a runway at an airport, and therefore OSHA will require a higher level of noise protection, such as earmuffs, instead. Now, since there are many variables and limitations to certain forms of equipment, it's best to know exactly what protection is best suited for your environment. It's advised that you check with your supervisor when considering protection to assure that it's right for the job as well as for you. Your employer will provide you with the correct PPE and also provide proper training on its use. If you elect to use your own equipment, such as your favorite hard hat or steel-toe shoes, it is still required for your employer to verify that it meets the OSHA requirement for your job and your environment. Many times you may be required to wear protection when it appears that there's no hazard present. OSHA requires your employer to enforce this rule when a hazard is likely to be present, not just when it is present. Written certification of your understanding of the personal protective equipment is required by OSHA. So, from time to time, you'll be required to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding of this standard. The OSHA standard for hazard communication, or sometimes referred to as HAZCOM, is based on a simple concept that employees have both a need and a right to know the hazards of chemicals that they're exposed to when working. You also need to know what protective measures are available to prevent adverse effects from occurring. What are those adverse effects? Well, to begin with, they can be explosive, induce sickness or illness, or cause injury. It really depends on the chemical and the hazard it creates. Now, for beginners, we'll start with the basics. First, it's important that you protect yourself and your coworkers from exposure. And this is done by having a responsible attitude and a clear understanding of the chemicals that are within your work environment. Even if you don't use the chemicals yourself, you're required to know about them if they're within your work area. Now, the Hazard Communication Standard covers all physical forms of chemicals such as liquids, solids, gases, vapors, fumes, and mists. And this also includes chemical exposure that is generated as a result of your work environment, such as welding fumes, dust, and exhaust fumes. It's not your responsibility to determine the hazards of these chemicals. That is left up to the chemical manufacturer, but it is your responsibility to know of the hazards associated with them. Fortunately, each manufacturer is required to provide that information on a label or tag adhered to every container of hazardous chemicals. Now, the identity name will appear on the label as either a trade name for the chemical or the chemical name itself. The label will also display the appropriate hazard associated with the chemical, such as flammable or causes lung damage. A bulletin called Material Safety Data Sheets, or MSDS for short, will also accompany each container or chemical, and this information is vital. And your supervisor will provide you with additional training on how to read the MSDS and will also show you where it's located for easy reference when needed. Now, the MSDS contains a variety of useful information. things like hazardous effects and recommended protective measures. And it would be advisable to become familiar with these sections as well as any other information of the MSDS that would be applicable to your situation when working with the chemical. The underlying purpose of the Hazardous Communication Standard is to reduce incidences of chemical source illness and injury. To ensure the success of your organization's HazCom program, you're strongly encouraged to approach your supervisor if you need additional assistance with understanding of the chemicals within your workplace. So, what is bloodborne pathogens? Is it a sexually transmitted disease? Is it something that only medical people should be concerned about? Should you only be concerned when blood is around? Well, actually, it's all of that and more. Although the name bloodborne induces thoughts of blood, it's only one of several bodily fluids that can contain microorganisms that carry a disease. Some of the other methods of transportation for HIV or hepatitis are saliva, semen, vomit, mucus, detached body tissue, open wounds, and, of course, blood itself. Now, OSHA requires anyone who, in their daily work environment, may come in contact with any of these items to be trained. And even if it's unlikely in your occupation, it appears best to be prepared when unanticipated exposure may occur. For example, someone you work with may cut their hands cleaning up broken glass, and although your daily routine would never cause you to become exposed, this rare situation can cause you to be in contact with potentially contaminated blood. So, regardless of how you may become exposed, OSHA wants you to treat all bodily fluids as if they were contaminated and infectious. In most situations, there will be two forms of exposure: anticipated exposure and unanticipated exposure. Now, anticipated exposure assumes that you are aware of the hazard and have acquired the proper PPE and training to shield yourself from becoming contaminated. Unanticipated exposure is when you have entered the presence of or have come in direct contact with potentially contaminated fluids without proper PPE. Now, when this does occur, you have to wash your hands and exposed areas with soap and running water as soon as possible. And in both cases, you are to inform your supervisor immediately of your exposure and to follow your organization's exposure control plan. Now, although there is no vaccination available for HIV or hepatitis C, there is one for hepatitis B, and your organization will offer it to you along with any other medical care needed. Good housekeeping is not something that is requested by your employer, but rather it's something that is required by OSHA. Provisions are found in several of OSHA's most recognized standards like asbestos, lead, electrical, storage of materials, hazard communications, and bloodborne pathogens, just to name a few. Simply stated, all places of employment, passageways, storerooms, and service rooms shall be kept clean and orderly and in a sanitary condition. Improper housekeeping can create a work environment where risk for fire, explosions, or other injury can occur. So to help reduce and eliminate this risk, it's important to follow your organization's policy and procedures on good housekeeping. Now, as a general rule, keeping aisles free of boxes, containers, supplies, hoses, cords, and other debris that can cause someone to trip is essential. If you notice something on the floor, pick it up or clean it up. Don't assume that someone else will look after it, and don't leave tools and other job-related items on the floor or near the edge of a workstation while you're working. It only takes a second for someone to walk by, slip, trip, fall, and get seriously injured. So never stack items in front of exits, passageways, or fire alarms that are needed during an emergency, even if it is just temporarily. And at the same time, if you should happen to notice flooring that is defective or needs repair, report it to your supervisor. Cleaning agents and other chemicals should be in a sealed container and clearly labeled with the ingredients. Labels that have become worn, smeared, or illegible should be replaced immediately. Also, containers that are not properly sealed or put away can release hazardous vapors. And these vapors can cause illness or be flammable and the cause of a fire or explosion. When storing chemicals, segregate them so that they cannot be mistaken for another item. You wouldn't want someone to grab a bottle of hydrochloric acid when they think they're grabbing a container of hand soap. And at the same time, make sure that substances that are reactive to external forces, such as vibration, heat, sunlight, sparks, or any other type of combustible agents, are stored properly. Improperly stored or mishandled chemicals have the recipe for disaster. Chemicals that are reactive toward each other should never be stored within close proximity of each other, and this will prevent a violent reaction between chemicals if they should happen to leak or spill. Maintaining a clean environment as you work is important, but it doesn't eliminate the need to clean up when a job is complete. So, be sure and store all tools and electrical cords, supplies, and chemicals used on the job back into their proper places when finished. Hazardous rags, sawdust, and other flammable substances, along with any flammable trash, should be properly disposed of in metal containers to avoid any accidental contact with flames or other heat sources. Good housekeeping is something that requires teamwork. There is no one single individual within your organization who's assigned to clean up after you and look after all the potential problems that you can easily fix or report. Play your part on the team and make it your business to practice good housekeeping. Enormous strides have been made over recent years to provide you with the best training and equipment than any other generation of workers, but none of this information and training is useful if you elect to ignore it. You are an important asset to your company and its future success, but only if you stay healthy. OSHA guidelines are not intended to be burdensome. Rather, they're designed to guide you and protect you while you work. If something feels unsafe during your normal workday, immediately contact your supervisor. Don't find out if it was unsafe by becoming an example or a statistic, because when it comes to an accident, there may not be a second chance.
What's the best way to control COVID-19 in the workplace? No single preventative measure will be 100% effective on its own. Public health measures should be layered with workplace health and safety measures to help lower the risk of COVID-19 transmission in the workplace. Public health control measures include wearing a mask. When properly worn, well-constructed and well-fitting masks add a good layer of protection. Personal hygiene. Wash your hands for 20 seconds or use a sanitizer with at least 60% alcohol and cough or sneeze into the bend of your arm or a tissue. Physical distancing. Maintain the greatest distance possible, at least 2 meters away from others. Keep interactions few and brief and avoid crowded spaces. Screening and isolation, quarantine. This measure includes asking questions about symptoms and exposures before allowing workplace entry and self-isolating if needed. Cleaning and disinfection. Routinely cleaning and disinfecting high-touch surfaces and shared objects. Ventilation. Helps improve air quality by reducing the concentration of potentially infectious droplets or aerosols. Vaccination. Reduces the chance of severe illness and contributes to community immunity. In addition to these public health measures, it's important to layer in workplace health and safety measures. The most effective measures control the virus at its source, followed by those along its path. The least effective measures protect at the worker level. The most effective control measures are elimination and substitution. Can you avoid or replace a high-risk setting or situation? Consider working from home, using online services, holding virtual meetings and events, closing high-risk spaces and services, and avoiding unnecessary travel. The next level is engineering controls. Install barriers to reduce physical contact between people, such as plexiglass, or direct traffic flow, such as lane dividers. Rearrange or remove furniture at least 2 meters apart. Use equipment that allows contactless procedures and improve ventilation. The next level is administrative policies. Consider how work is designed and carried out. Review and update your procedures. Use frequent communication and training. adjust your scheduling or place staff in cohorts, set occupancy limits, offer flexible sick leave, and include routine cleaning and disinfection procedures. Finally, there is personal protective equipment, or PPE. This is equipment worn by a worker to minimize exposure to specific hazards. In some cases, PPE such as a respirator and eye protection might be needed. As mentioned before, the best approach is a layered approach. To understand why, let's picture these control measures as slices of Swiss cheese. Each slice acts as a layer of defense against the spread of COVID-19. Ideally, a single barrier or slice would be enough to prevent the spread of COVID-19, but each barrier has weaknesses, or in this case, holes. But where one slice fails, the next slice may succeed in blocking the spread of COVID-19. With each added layer of control, the risk gets lower. Having too few layers may not be enough to protect your workers. Make sure to use as many layers as you can. Every layer helps reduce the risk of exposure to COVID-19 in the workplace. A combination of public health measures and workplace health and safety measures in a layered approach will give workers the strongest protection against the virus.
No one can predict when they'll be put into a life-threatening situation, but they can happen at any time. In light of recent events, it is necessary to review how to react should you encounter an active shooter situation. Active shooter situations are unpredictable and evolve quickly. An active shooter is someone who engages in killing or attempting to kill people in a confined populated area. In most cases, there is no pattern to the selection of their victims. Most people will never be involved in an active shooter situation, but everyone needs to know what to do to protect his or her own life. Offices should develop an emergency action plan to alert all staff members of a threatening situation and assist emergency personnel in locating anyone who may be trapped.
The green team is meeting in the conference room. The green team is meeting in the conference room.
Develop a system to notify staff of a security threat in the office. Evacuate the building only if you know it is safe to do so. Try to have an escape route and plan in mind. Evacuate regardless of whether others agree to follow. Leave your belongings behind. Help others escape if possible, and try to prevent individuals from entering an area where the active shooter may be. If you do attempt to evacuate, make certain that your hands are away from your body and clearly visible to any law enforcement officers responding. Do not make any furtive movements that may alarm officers.
The green team is meeting in the conference room. The green team is meeting in the conference room.
If evacuation is not possible, hide out. Seek sanctuary in an office or room, preferably without interior windows and with a door capable of locking. Stay out of the active shooter's view. Find a place to hide where the active shooter is less likely to find you. If possible, move furniture to barricade the door. Once in the room with the door secured, do not open the door again until notified by public safety officials. Once you are in a safe place, silence your cell phone and/or pager. Turn off any source of noise. Hide behind large items like furniture. Remain quiet. Call 911 when it is safe to do so. If you cannot speak, leave the line open and allow the dispatcher to listen.
Hello, facility security.
Security? There's a shooter on the 6th floor. I'm in room 603A.
Offices should be labeled inside office doors, identifying room numbers with emergency information.
We need help. Please hurry.
I'm sending officers.
Okay, guys, we got a report of a shooter. Let's go.
Once a notification has been sent, do not continue to call for emergency assistance, as this will only tie up phone lines and possibly slow the response of law enforcement and medical personnel. Do, however, contact emergency services by phone to advise of injuries and current information as it relates to the location of the shooter or threat. Information that will be the most helpful to give to the operator is the location of the active shooter, the number of shooters, if more than one, physical description of the shooter, number and type of weapons held by the shooter, and number of potential victims at the location. As a last resort, and only when your life is in imminent danger, Attempt to disrupt and/or incapacitate the active shooter by acting as aggressively as possible against him or her, throwing items and improvising weapons, yelling, and committing to your actions. Do not leave your sanctuary until expressly directed to do so by credible authorities. Any person seen wandering common areas will be at extreme risk from not only the threat but law enforcement responders as well.
Police officer, freeze! Let me see your hands. Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Put your hands behind your back.
When law enforcement arrives, remain calm and follow officers' instructions. Put down any items in your hands. Immediately raise your hands and spread your fingers. Keep hands visible at all times. Avoid making quick movements toward officers, such as holding on to them for safety. Avoid pointing, screaming, and/or yelling. Do not stop to ask officers for help or directions when evacuating. Just proceed in the direction from which the officers are entering the premises. The first officers on the scene will not stop to help injured persons. Additional officers and emergency personnel will follow the initial rescue team. Once you reach a safe location or an assembly point, you will likely be held in that area until the situation is under control and all witnesses have been identified and questioned. Do not leave until law enforcement authorities have instructed you to do so. As we've seen with so many recent events, these situations are unpredictable. Being alert and being mindful of your surroundings is your best line of defense to come out of such a situation unharmed.